This is Mikey Mason, and you're listening to Why We Game.
I'm Brodor, and this is Why We Game. My guest this episode is the illustrious FTB resident ginger, Wayne Cole.
It's about time you have me on.
I know. I've had Dan and Chad on twice because I'm the worst. Whatever. People don't want to listen to my excuses. Wayne, you're finally here. People want to listen to you. How are you, man?
I'm pretty good. Happy it's a 3-day weekend.
Oh, for sure. Well, for me, every day is a weekend. But so, yeah, because you don't have to work on Monday because of the Memorial Days.
That's right. Gonna do some grilling, I think.
Really? Nice. You having family over?
No. My house, I have a lot of stairs going up, and my parents are of the age now that stairs are really difficult for them.
It's not an introvert thing. It's my family's old thing.
Yeah, usually when I do something like this, when I do a big either smoking ribs or grilling, I'll put together a couple plates and I'll take them down to my parents. But I don't invite them over anymore because they can't make it up the stairs.
Do you do a lot of grilling or barbecuing?
Yeah, I do all the cooking in my house ever since the pandemic started.
So you said you've been doing this since the pandemic started. Did you just pick it up out of necessity or boredom or?
So growing up, we were poor. And occasionally I would go out and my mom would give me like a budget of $20, $40. And I'd go to Aldi's and I'd put together the meals. And I learned how to cook as a teenager. Then over the years, when it come to going to work and things, I'd come home and I just wouldn't feel like it. And so my wife did a lot of the cooking for a while. She went to culinary art school for a bit. So, there was something that she would do. But once the pandemic started, suddenly I'm home. And she had gotten away from cooking a little bit because she has some health issues and just has a problem getting around. So I got back into it. And it's something I do enjoy. I'm not really a recipe kind of person. And I don't bake because I definitely don't follow recipes.
Yeah, because baking is, that shit's science.
Yeah, but I actually enjoy cooking. And I've always enjoyed grilling and smoking and things like that. The first smoker I got was this tiny little electric smoker that was a half roaster, half smoker thing.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take a step back here, Wayne. Electric smoker? That seems antithetical to smoking.
Yep. So I was in an apartment. I was on the second story, and I couldn't do things like a normal smoker with fire going and things like that on my balcony. So this thing, what you do, you put the bottom layer, you put the wood chips. Then you put a pan of water on top of that, and then the food on top of that, and it heats up the wood chips, and they start smoking, and the smoke comes around.
Okay.
And this was just a tiny little one. The one I have now is still an electric smoker, except now I have like a $300 one that has all the bells and whistles, and I can do, I think, 40 pounds of meat in it at a given time.
And I presume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the advantage to electric is temperature control.
Yes, and you can just turn it off. But I can also set it for things like run 6 hours and stop. I never do that. I set it for over, and then I use digital thermometers and things. Unless I'm doing like ribs, because like ribs, I do the 3-2-1 method. First 3 hours, smoke it in the smoker, just plain ribs. At the 3-hour mark, take the ribs out, wrap them in aluminum foil, pour apple juice in.
Let the apple juice steam, kind of loosen things up
for 2 hours,
right?
And then pull it out for the last hour back onto the grate. I like to fall off the bones ribs.
Right, me too. When we have to resort to cannibalism, I want you to cook the hands because I want the finger meat to just, I just want to hold on to finger bone and just pull meat off and throw it away like I do a good hot wing. I just want to pull the meat off my bone.
So I have a rule when it comes to my kitchen appliances. I buy cheap the first time until I see if I actually am going to use it. If I use it enough, then I can justify spending the money to get something nice. So like the very first dehydrator I had when I started making jerky, I got a cheap $20 dehydrator. I found I used it, so I bought a really nice one that has temperature control and the whole deal. The smoker, I had the one I got from work. It was a rewards thing for being there for 10 years.
Oh, sure, because they're members of some Amway facsimile, and they're like, here's a catalog, Wayne, pick a gift.
Exactly. And so I got the smoker from that, liked it, used it like crazy, and then bought a nicer one.
Did your original one crap out, or does it still work?
No, it would still work. It's small. I didn't get a full-size turkey into it. I'd have to do just the turkey breast.
Right, it's like my first bong. My lungs have just evolved. I've worked up to something more powerful. Sure,
yeah I could never have done ribs in it because it was too small.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. So how regularly, people are like, when are you going to fucking talk about gaming? How regularly do you smoke meat?
For a while there, when the pandemic started, I was doing something in the smoker every Wednesday. It's not that often now. Now it's every couple weeks I'll do something. I've done turkeys, chicken, fish, ribs, brisket.
Have you been in the office or working remotely through the pandemic?
Remote.
Wow. So you could just, I'm just going to get up in the morning, check in with work. You know, it's early enough. I'm going to go ahead and get something started on the smoker for the day.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing is there's a lot of people that do smoking at work too. So we all share tips, tricks, and we'll share pictures. And
right. Hey, I found this great YouTube video on this cool technique for hickory smoke or whatever.
And now originally I just would buy whatever kind of cheap wood chips there are too. Now I have the array of wood chips that I mix and match depending on what I'm cooking.
That level of expertise, I think it's very interesting to be able to do that. But there's a lot of knowledge. Yeah. There's a big learning curve, and I'm afraid to waste food. That's something that my mom's mom instilled in me.
Oh, the first time I used the smoker I have right now, I went from a previous smoker, not that tiny one, but one after that did break, to this one. I went out, I go to a local meat shop, Kendrick's, and I bought 60 pounds of meat, and I ruined all of it because the temperatures weren't the same. It wasn't the same. And I was so used to the old one, I hadn't gotten used to it. You have to go something cheap the first time you use one until you get used to it.
All right, so if somebody was going to start, like, what's the best cut of meat to try?
Probably something forgiving. Turkey is really easy to do. And
turkey's gross.
I'm a fan of turkey.
Are you really? I find that even the best turkeys, turkey has to be super on point to have flavor. Usually they're just bland.
The other one that's really forgiving is pulled pork.
Now pig, I will eat. Yeah. I'll eat everything on the pig. The asshole, the nose, the ears, all of it.
Yeah, a nice pork butt. You get a great flavor, and it's really forgiving, especially because you're probably going to put barbecue sauce on it if you overdo it a little bit.
Right,
so,
sure.
Very forgiving. The hardest that I do is the brisket, because you got to get brisket just right.
To me, barbecue is something, it's like automotive work or plumbing or electrical work. I pay an expert. I just pay somebody that knows what they're doing to take care of it. I don't have the kind of confidence and fortitude to dive into something like that.
I've said it before, I'll do my own electrical, but I don't touch plumbing. And people always say that's crazy because you can kill yourself with electrical. Electrical, I can measure and test, and it's a science to me. Plumbing, I don't know what it's going to do until I turn the water on, but it's probably going to spray me with water because I'm going to have screwed it up.
Yeah, in retrospect, if I had life to do all over again, I would have gone to trade school and learned to be a plumber.
I had a class in high school. It was one of the shop classes. Don't even remember which one it was, but we changed electrical outlets. We wired lights. And those are skills I've taken with me through the rest of my life. Once I had a house, I was using that like crazy.
When did you get into the gaming hobby? Because before we started recording, we were talking that when I think of Fear the Boot, right, as a show, as a listener, before I was ever invited on as a guest, I thought of Fear the Boot as Dan, Chad, and Wayne, and then Pat and John and Julia and et al., whichever rotating hosts were coming in at the time. But especially early on when you guys invited me to be on the show on occasion before being a regular host, it was still the three of you that I thought as the core Fear the Boot host group. Out of all of them, I know you the least, and you have the shortest gaming history because you've not been gaming that long comparatively.
Yeah, I never knew what gaming was until my late 20s.
You're how old now?
I turned 41 this year.
You've not been gaming 2 decades.
No. For me, I was a huge geek growing up, but nobody was gaming in my high school. I got into comics, I got into sci-fi, I got books, the whole deal. Never got into gaming because nobody was doing it. Once I started working, somebody actually mentioned gaming, but I didn't understand what they were saying. So, like, a guy gave me a printed copy of GURPS Lite, and I thought it was some sort of board game. And I was kind of looking through it, I was like, I'm not getting this, because I didn't have the concepts. I didn't even have this big awareness of D&D. I remember the first time I knew really anything about it was from the movie Salt Lake City Punk.
Okay, I've never seen Salt Lake City Punk, so I don't know the reference.
They basically were playing D&D until they went punk instead.
Gotcha. So they were always sort of rebellious underground, and punk music just replaced Dungeons and Dragons. Gotcha.
Yeah, and I remember I had this whole thing in my head of, how does a game like that work? You bring a sheet of paper? You could just change your numbers when you're home, and I didn't understand any of it.
Right, there's no regulatory committee. How does this work?
Exactly. And I came so close to gaming for so long without ever actually being gaming. When you look at some of the things I did, I was involved with, on the BBS's, virtual wrestling leagues, where I was running the leagues and people would come in and they type out their promos, you know, running their mouth against each other.
Okay.
And then the matches happen and I do the matches. And sometimes I would even use like simulators and random, not dice, other random things to determine who wins.
All right, well, one thing that you three, the aforementioned core Fear the Boot in my mind guys have in common that I don't is the tech lingo and the tech background. What is a BBS?
Oh, bulletin board system.
Okay, so this is basically like a MUD.
Yeah, it was before you really had the internet. Your computer would call into somebody else's computer, and it was a bulletin board. Think of it like forums, except instead of going to a web page, you're dialing into somebody's house where they're running this. And they would have the different threads of things you would talk in, and they had games on them that you would play that are all text-based games.
So people would say, they would text out, you know, "Oh, Rainbow King, I'm coming for you. I'm taking the crown this week," you know, that sort of shit.
Yeah.
They would type that out. And then how would you adjudicate a bout?
They had stats as well. This is really as close to role-playing games as you can get.
So you're the commissioner of a fantasy wrestling league with stats, but you're not playing D&D.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I would get really into writing out the matches and what happens. And everyone has these are my moves, my signature moves and things. And you would work their moves into the matches. And you occasionally get a message from someone, "Hey, I want to interfere in this match." So you work that into it as well. So I did that for a while, not realizing that that's basically almost gaming as it was.
Right. I mean, you're already doing a soap opera, organized, scripted thing that has a mechanic system rooted in it.
And finally, I was working at a financial institute. I can say now because it doesn't exist anymore. Working at Scottrade. And Chad ended up working for me. And he starts talking about his podcast and his hobby.
So you're Chad Weiler's boss?
Yes.
How much of an insufferable pain in the ass was that?
At that point, it wasn't so bad. A little bit later, it gets kind of bad.
Okay.
But no, so he had just came onto the team, and he's starting to talk about his hobby and things. He sees that I have all of these other nerd things that I do. Huge geek. But I know nothing about role-playing games. And so he points me to episode 115 of Fear the Boot. This is a huge episode for me. And it actually goes on for the next year or so, impacting me in gaming. What it was, Dan and Chad got together and they made little tiny chunks. This episode altogether burns it onto a CD. It's a lot of tiny little episodes that are tracks. And the idea is you take this and you give it to your non-gamer friend. And they listen, and it explains what gaming is. They do a little example role-playing. And it still left me with a lot of questions, but it gave me some context. So from there, I just was talking, like, I'd love to just see this. Can I just come watch a game? And apparently the gaming group, one of the guys in there, Josh, he had to step away from gaming. He had another podcast he did, and he has War Machine at the time, and his wife wouldn't let him continue gaming as well.
Oh, so she essentially, you have a limited number of hobbies that you're allowed in the marriage.
Yep.
And you have to pick.
You're spending too much time away from the family. You need to spend more time. So with him gone,
and Wayne, this is why I don't have children.
So with him gone, Chad invites me to come over, and I'm listening to the podcast ahead of time. I know that they're playing Skies of Glass. I've gone through the old episodes where they're talking about Skies of Glass. I go out there and I find all of these documents that Dan put together about Skies of Glass. You know, the old rule system he was using at that point. I print them all out. I take a binder. I make a cover for it, have the binder. I come with a version of the rule book.
Oh, my God.
With a bunch of other documents in there, too, that had nothing to do with it.
Did they get a restraining order? I would have been like, this guy's fucking nuts. Lock him up.
Dan saw it. He's like, wow, that's more detailed than anything I've got. Because I didn't know the history at that point. I didn't know that version of Skies of Glass was gone. That there had been a falling out with some of the people that were working on it with him. It wasn't too long after that, but I didn't know any of that behind-the-scenes stuff. So I thought, this is the current rule set. And I also had a bunch of papers in there that were other documents that had nothing to do with it that I didn't realize weren't part of it. But, you know, I found this binder the other day, by the way. I still have it. It's in my basement, along with some of my notes from that original Skies of Glass campaign. So my very first experience with gaming is I come downstairs at this guy named Dave's house, and I make a character with Dan and Chad for the game. We weren't actually going to play that session. We were going to play next session. But I make my first character, and it's Skies of Glass, the very first game I've ever played. I don't start with D&D or anything published. I went 2 years, maybe, before I ever played a game system that had been published. It was multiple homebrews after another.
How do you think that has impacted your perspective on the hobby compared to a gnarled old grognard like me who's been doing it since they were a preteen?
I had to have a conversation with them at one point because they kept trying to avoid mistakes. The things that everyone knows, don't split the party. Everyone wants to be a dragon at one point. All of that, I hadn't had any of that. And so they would be like, we've learned this over the years. Like, I need to make my own mistakes. Stop trying to shield me. Let me make my mistakes. I had to have that conversation with them. And that's one of the reasons why when we did the game that is the Gnarl game was because it's like, I want to play a D&D game. You guys are talking about how you don't like D&D. You're worn out on it. You know, all of this. I've never done it. In the end, it was Chad running D&D, so it wasn't actually really even D&D.
I would probably make a case that gave all of them a fresh perspective on playing D&D because they got to see it through your eyes. They got to live vicariously. My favorite people to game with are people that are just getting into the hobby, but are also taking it very seriously.
Yeah.
And they just marvel at anything, you know, any trick, any old, hey, look, I just sawed this person from the audience in half, and they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe you just sawed that person in half. Holy shit, you know, I love that.
Well, I remember in that Skies of Glass game, everything was new. So the first time we get captured, it's like, well, they took away all our stuff. I don't see any way out of this. Our characters aren't getting our stuff back. Our characters are going to die. It's something now, get captured all the time. But it never happened to me before. And so I'm trying to find ways to get us out of there. Everyone else is just going along with it because they know Dan is a GM. They know there'll be some opportunity, and I'm trying to find ways to escape. The other characters are all nice and calm about being a prisoner in the middle of Maw Carver's camp.
Wow, because they know there's a safety hatch. Even if there isn't a literal X card on the table, they trust the GM enough to know that they're not going to be abused or taken advantage of.
Yeah, well, and they know the real secret. If he kills the whole party, the game's over. A GM doesn't want that. I didn't know that secret at that point. So the whole time I'm trying to figure out some way to escape. Yeah, all of those experiences were new. And then Chad and I talked about the game at work because we worked together. And there was one point where it's like, I'd like my character to go through this character arc. I'd like him to interact with yours. So we script out what's going to happen between us. We get to the table, we try it, and it just flops because it wasn't natural. It was prepared, and we thought about it, and it was the most awkward, horrible role-playing I've ever been a part of. I will never do that again. It is going to always be natural from this point on.
You're playing Skies of Glass. How long was it before you transitioned and said, hey, I would like to run a game on my own?
I started with the Skies of Glass game, and then we went through and did Fear the Con was right not too long after that. This was Fear the Con 2. And that was my first time playing any systems other than Skies of Glass. Was trying to a couple different systems there. I have a lot of really good memories of some of those games, but I obviously wasn't ready to run anything then. Didn't think I ever could run a game at that point. After we did Skies of Glass, the next game, Chad wanted to do a revolving GM game.
Chad knows exactly what he's doing at this
Yes.
point. He's roped you into the hobby, and now, hey, let's do a rotating GM, because he's going to force you into the hot seat of Game Master.
Well, and also at this point, he knows that I like writing. I had been doing blogs on the Fear the Boot blog for a little while, writing articles and things. And I started writing an article about being a new gamer, being new to the hobby. I was also doing a time travel blog for a while there. But there were a couple people that he was trying to keep that front feed going, keep interesting things going onto the website. So there were about 4 of us that were writing various articles. So he knew I liked writing, and it seems like anyone that likes writing and gets into gaming ends up wanting to run.
Right, wanting to share something that they've created, right? And to be, I don't know, I mean, I'm so conflicted on the responsibilities of the Game Master, but that narrative cornerstone, I mean, the Game Master is so important to that driving narrative of the game.
Dan is going through some difficult things at work at that point, and that's why the Skies of Glass game ends up falling apart. It was a horrible job he was working at the time, and he needed a break. So he wasn't at all of the revolving GM games either. You know, there's a lot going on in his life at the time, so he would come in and out of them. And Chad starts off this revolving GM game. We do 2 sessions, then the next GM does 2 sessions. Chad he runs his first 2 sessions and leaves it on a cliffhanger. So what he's doing for me there, that I see now that I had no idea then, he's giving me an easy way to start. Because one of the hardest things running a game is that first starting scene. I know what my starting scene is going to be because he left me on a cliffhanger. I know what most of my first session is going to be because I'm dealing with the cliffhanger. And then the second session is one where I come up with it all on my own. And then we move on to the next GM. So that was the first one.
And what system was this?
This was another homebrew.
Okay.
It was a Cortex-based homebrew, but like a really old version of Cortex, and using magic cards to help create the characters.
You're doing a role-playing game in a system that is I don't want to say amorphous, but it's not finished. It's still a living document, right? And then you go to another game that is essentially this so homebrewed version of Cortex that it's almost unrecognizable.
The magic system was entirely homebrewed and added onto it.
Gotcha.
By one of the guys at the table. Again, not playing anything that's been published or that I can look at a book and look at a reference for, I guess is a good way to put it. But my sessions went well, and I was really happy with it. So after that, I started thinking about Fear the Con 3 as it was coming up. And by this point, I've joined the podcast.
How long were you gaming with the FTB group before they said, hey, we want you to come join the show?
Less than a year after starting to game with them, Chad was sick, and they brought me on to talk comic books. It was going to be originally a bonus episode, but it became comic books and then talking about new players.
So this is your secret Fear the Boot interview.
Yes, and I don't know that, but they've already set this up. They are checking to see how I would do on the mics. So I come in, and we talk comics, we talk new gamer. You know, after I leave, I get the invite to become a regular host. They wanted that perspective of somebody that had not gamed before, because it was a voice that they didn't have on the mics. I think I did horrible at the beginning. That episode wasn't that great, but it wasn't that bad. My next episode was horrible because I started thinking about being on a podcast.
you didn't think about that you and I are in this room having a conversation,
Right.
not the person in Australia that's listening to it a week from now.
Yep. And so to me, when I listen to that episode afterwards, I sound forced. I sound like I'm trying to put on an act, and that's just not who I am when I podcast. Not now, at least. I just talk. Just try to be natural. And I've been told by a lot of people that I've met that that's one of the things they enjoy about listening to me is out of all the hosts, they feel like I'm one of the more relatable ones.
Sure, because you're very genuine.
That's exactly the word that people use. Part of that came from that very first attempt at an episode where I cringe. I can't listen to that episode because I think it was horrible. And one of the listeners came on and said, I don't really think he's a good fit for the show. In the comments.
Oh, fucking brutal. Yeah, I mean, it's no, oh my God, when the Fear the Boot listeners don't like you, it's fucking hard. It's hard.
So what I did, it hit me, but I wasn't going to let it show. So I took that quote and I took a part of it and I made it my signature on the forums and just did a wit with it.
Right. That's very bold of you. I would have been crushed.
Oh, I was, but I wasn't going to let it show.
Yeah, I would have been a bitch about it. I'm sorry. I guess I'm not. Are we allowed to say? I don't know what words I'm not supposed to use anymore. Anyway, I would have crumpled like fragile glass, man.
So anyway, at this point, I was part of the podcast. Oh, I forgot about the other thing about 115. For Fear the Con 2, I had a CD burner at that time that could actually burn an image onto the top of the CD, like the artwork. So my wife put together a design for that episode with the werewolf that Chad is doing in the episode and with dice and with the logo. And I burned a couple hundred of these and we gave them out at the convention. You know, this was before I was joining the podcast. I came in and I had all of these and I was helping them do prep work for the convention. So that's why I say like that one episode was a huge thing. I used to give it away when I still had copies of it to people just when they would ask about, well, what is this gaming thing you started to do? Here, listen to this. Throw it in your car.
You're gaming with them. It's less than a year. You're on the show.
Yep.
You start involving yourself with the podcast, but then also with the convention.
Yeah.
Because as far as I've always known,
I started helping out with the convention before I was on the podcast because everyone in the gaming group did, whether they were on the podcast or not.
Essentially, everyone had been conscripted to help with the con, whether they were on the show or not.
Yep. Then for Fear the Con 3, I decided I wanted to run something. And the first thing I went to was, well, let's run a superhero game. And I came up with this idea. And I talked about this recently on a Fear the Boot game notes. This is my biggest gaming failure, was trying to run this game. It's Mutants and Masterminds. I have never read a game book before. I have never played a published system before. I tried to read and understand Mutants and Masterminds, and there are some real basics that I don't get at that time. I've run it since then, and I get the system now, but at the time, there were some things I didn't understand. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand the system. I spent a lot of time making these really interesting characters that are the handout characters. One mistake I make is I have a trader in the group. The trader's name is Rodiard, which is trader spelled backwards. Completely stole that from Stan Lee's Who Wants to Be a Superhero TV show. Well, as I'm handing out the characters, I tell them about this guy that's on their team. They don't catch that it's trader spelled backwards. What they catch is this guy has like razor blades and blades. I want to be him. Why can't I be him? And it wasn't smart to say, I just didn't make the character sheet yet. I'll give the players at the con a chance to play him.
Okay.
No, I don't think of that. It's just I have no good answer for them. So they have all of these characters that have ties and things.
So wait, just so I understand, there's just NPC tag-along.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yep, and that NPC is going to be a trader.
And he's so cool because he's got all the blades and stuff that everybody wants to play him. And you're like, oh, no, guys, you can't play him. He's just there along for the narrative.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's because he's going to be a trader. The only thing I have set up, I don't have a story. Like, I thought I had a story, but all I really had was the equivalent of Superman and Doomsday are fighting. And these guys are going to be street-level heroes saving people in the midst of all of this. I never imagined that they're going to want to go fight Doomsday. I established this is the Superman of the world and he's being beaten up by this guy. I'm thinking, okay, they're going to avoid him. I don't think that's not how role players play. They think that they have that opportunity to go take out this guy.
Yeah, you put the dragon there specifically for us to kill it and take its shit.
Exactly, and I don't realize that at all. They also start getting frustrated because I give him all these things. I'm a comic book guy. I think of all of these unique ways you can use your powers to save like a bus that's being knocked over and things. They look at it and they say, okay, I have blast, I have this, all of these combat powers. How do I save a bus with combat powers?
That brings something up that as a retailer, I was always intrigued by. The absence of significant crossover between the gaming and comic book communities. The people that read comics and that also game, in my experience, are far, far fewer than the people that just exclusively do one or the other. So, yeah, I can imagine that if you sat down with a group of gamers who weren't comic book people, they just don't have that frame of reference. They don't have the fire, the spark in their imagination of, what would Cyclops do?
They think they're supposed to go fight the big Doomsday. And that wasn't the whole point of it. And I realized pretty quickly I had spent all this time figuring out the mechanics and the characters that I hadn't really created a story for them. And at that point, I wasn't good enough to wing it, especially when I didn't know the system or any of that. So the game doesn't make it all the way through. I call it because I realize I got nowhere to go from here. And we play board games for the rest of the night.
Yeah, but I think that takes a tremendous amount of courage for someone. So this is the first time you're running a game at a convention for strangers.
Well, I don't run. This isn't at the convention.
Okay.
I ran it for my gaming group, Dan and Chad and them, before the convention to see if I could do it.
Which was, again,
posting.
Very wise of you to do a dry run.
So I left that realizing, okay, that was an utter failure. I still want to run something. But there were all these questions about the system and all people wanting to know about that. What can I do to not have that be a problem? And then I come to my realization. I can run Skies of Glass. Nobody at that convention has ever played in a Skies of Glass game. Nobody knows the rules better than me outside of Dan and Chad, who aren't going to be in the game. So I could just take that off the table, and whatever I tell them the rules are, those are the rules. So I come up with the idea I'm going to run Skies of Glass. During the Skies of Glass campaign, at one point, I asked Dan, because we're going through southern Missouri into southern Illinois. So, big comic book guy. I go to the Superman celebration in Metropolis, Illinois every year. So I ask him, hey, what happened to Metropolis? It's not close enough to Paducah to have been hit by a nuke. It has all of this history. There's a fort there that the French used to use.
Is there really?
Yeah, Fort Massac. It is, unfortunately, most of it got destroyed in a flood. I say recently, but it was about 10 years ago at this point. So I asked him about that, and he's like, you want to know what happened to it? Write it up. So my game is Skies of Glass Metropolis. And I come up with this idea of here's what's happened with the town. I run it at the convention, and I run it twice. I have the exact same scenario. I put it in 2 slots. So this is where I learned just how much fun it can be to run the same game for 2 different groups and see how drastically different they interact. So I run it, and the first time I've got my laptop open where I've got all of my notes, and it's just not clicking. I don't even know what made me realize it, but at some point I just stop, I close my laptop, and I start running the game, and immediately it turns around. I was using the laptop as a crutch, and I was putting it between me and the players. And the moment I put that down and just started running my NPCs, running the game, everything went well. Second time I ran it, no issues at all, because I already knew that, and I didn't try to use the laptop. I learned a huge lesson there for me as a GM. I can get myself disconnected from the players. I am better at improv than I give myself credit for, and I needed to just rely on it. What ended up happening after that, I really enjoyed how the players interacted with that story. I had kind of started working through what a larger story would be, but I took that game, and I had created a new character because I had I'd originally had 4 characters set up, but then I had a female sign up for the game. So I created a female character. Then I sat down and I started actually writing this out. And I did a serial fiction of Skies of Glass Metropolis. I wrote a novel that I released every week on skiesofglass.com at the time, a new section of it, until I had a full novel. And then Chris Hussey wrote a story after me, and he did his serial fiction as well.
I had no idea that you had done that for Skies of Glass, that you'd written a full novel.
It may be because it was my first game system, but it is my favorite setting, and it's my favorite game. I got so into it that I wrote the equivalent of a full novel. And I still have it all. I want to edit it. I want to do something with it. The problem is I wrote it as serial fiction. So here's a chunk this week, here's a chunk next week, not as chapters. Ooh, so there's a lot of artificial cliffhangers in there, and there's things like that don't necessarily, it doesn't flow like a book.
I read Butcher, man. You can have cliffhangers at the end of every chapter. You know yourself.
Yeah, but in this case it would be cliffhangers 2 or 3 times during the chapter.
Oh, yeah, no, that's no bueno.
Yeah, no, so I've got to fix that if I ever want to re-release it. But I started getting feedback on it, and I got some really good feedback. I got some constructive criticism that was very valid. I didn't have an editor for it. I was releasing it weekly. As I do with most projects, I started off creating a huge buffer. So I had maybe a month's worth already written before I ever started. And then I caught up, and I was doing it by the week and doing it the night before it was supposed to be out. That is a huge problem I have. I do that with every project I work on, and I do it with my gaming a lot of times. Who am I kidding? Night before. Sometimes I do my prep work an hour or 2 before the game session.
I don't think that you're alone in that you're a creative who also procrastinates. I think that the two things are hand in hand with most people that I know who express an interest in creativity and want to pursue it full time. Yeah, they just, even if there's not a deadline, man.
That's really it. I learned that about myself, that for creative projects, I need to have a deadline. I need to be held accountable. If I feel like I'm being held accountable, I'm not being held accountable. No one says anything if I'm late or anything, but I know it's going out. And as long as I have that set and I make myself feel accountable, I get shit done.
Is that how you're able to maintain a consistent pace with your fiction that you release on Fridays?
Yes, because I say it is a Friday release. Because of that, I do it every Friday and I don't ever miss it. I know I have people reading. I don't know how many people I have reading. I've gotten some feedback. I intentionally don't look at the numbers that I have on the web pages because I don't want to know how many I have right now. Because if it's too low, then it will be something.
It's hurtful.
Yeah.
It's not a reflection that you did anything wrong. It's just a reflection that there's so much out there. It's extremely difficult to break through and to get people to pay attention to your thing.
Yeah. And some of these that I do, some weeks it isn't very good. Some weeks I think it's some of my best stuff. I'm really happy with the one I just released this Friday. I think it's one of my better ones.
I read that one this morning. It was very sweet.
Yeah, I struggled with the ending. I had 2 endings in mind. One was a happy ending. One is a miserable, horrible ending. And in the end, I created a third route.
I love a short story or fiction that leaves some ambiguity for the audience. I almost want the opposite in a film. I almost want it to be a perfectly wrapped up thing, but in a fiction like that, reading a book or reading a short story, I'm okay.
You know, I've got some flash fiction that's published out there.
I do. That was on the agenda. But since you bring it up, why don't you tell us about that?
So I have 2 short stories. They were in Sojourn 1 and Sojourn 2. But I have a flash fiction that was out in Worth 1,000 Words. That is a Skies of Glass story. That's the one that you and Dan are both in that book as well.
Right,
you're bookending that one. The story is about one of the characters in my bigger story of Skies of Glass Metropolis. A old man that has been there since the bombs dropped. And he's at the end of his life. He's seen everything. And the whole story is about him. You can read it and never know it's a Skies of Glass story, but it is, because it is that specific character is called out, and he mentions other characters that were from that fiction. But I wanted to make it something that would be more approachable for people, so I don't have like GCs in it or anything like that.
No, I think that's quite clever because who knows? Like, I mean, for example, when I backed that Kickstarter, you get 2 copies of the book and just donate one to the local library.
Yeah.
So you have something that is approachable to a much broader audience. Speaking of your devotion and love of Skies of Glass, something that you and Dan and a couple of other people behind the scenes have been working on is bringing Skies of Glass to fruition as a product. Now, marketing-wise, we don't know what that looks like,
right,
but you guys are putting something official together, am I right?
Yeah, we're on the 3rd version of the beta right now is what we're getting feedback on. And we're actively working on the 4th version of the beta. So Dan had his original rules that he had put together. Skies of Glass has gone through so many rules revisions since he originally created this as a LARP.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be a dick when I say this, but you guys are writers, right? Writers first, storytellers first, and game designers second.
Yeah, well, and this is the first time that I've been part of putting it together as a rule set. And so Dan came, it's the rule set of the actual play that you and I were in. There's been quite a bit of additions since then, and part of it is writing up the setting stuff as well. He'd been working on this for a while. He had a wiki out there, but he sometimes needs somebody to just help him push things along. I tell him he needs a creative adjacent. Somebody that's next to him that's not necessarily the creative person, that's just acting as a project manager and poking him.
Not that this is going to happen, but there was a time in my life where Dan offered me the opportunity to move in with him, and I think that would have been good for Dan because I would have been up his ass.
Yeah, he needs somebody to keep him going, and that was what one of the listeners was doing. BC Young went out there, took all of the information that Dan had given out during the actual play as well as some of the old stuff and created his own OneNote of what was going on system-wise. And then Dan started putting this all on a wiki page, and we started working on the wiki.
How fucking cool is that? That a listener of your podcast is such a fan of the creativity that you bring forth that they compile all this work to encourage you to continue the project. I mean, that... Yeah. I can't even express how fucking cool that is.
I think the closest I've had to that, and it's not nowhere near that, I have had characters that I've created get used and played at con games. Like, I did an actual play for a long time called Knights of Rainsboro. And my character Ricochet, somebody became Kid Ricochet at one of the cons. And then Ricochet himself showed up at one of them. And then Sir William the Bard from the Gnarl game was played in a wrestling game.
What kind of smack talk does Sir William the Bard do in the wrestling ring?
I know it involved a frying pan.
Nice.
Because I was given the character sheet after the fact.
Well, you had mentioned an actual play that you had done in association with a podcast that you do, which you've been on longer than Fear the Boot, right?
Not longer.
Not longer? Okay.
Yep. It was right after I started Fear the Boot.
Well, my research department will be savagely beaten.
Right after I started Fear the Boot, a guy named Aaron Head reached out to me. He did a comic book podcast with his friend Paul that called Funny Books with Aaron and Paulie. And basically he reached out and said, hey, you're a comic book guy. You want to come guest on ours? And so I was on for an episode or two at first and then eventually continued being on the podcast all the way up to it's a weekly thing I still do. It's a weekly comic book review podcast. At one point we started talking, it's like, we'd like to game. Paul had never gamed. He was not a gamer at all. And so we came up with we did this world building series. We came up with the city of Rainsboro and our whole superhero world we were playing in. And it was Paul's first game ever. And eventually he came to one of the Fear the Cons where it was the first time he played at a table with people. Because his first game was this online game that we were playing. And I love that character so much. Ricochet is my character. Think of him kind of like Speedball, Spider-Man, and Deadpool all rolled into one.
Okay, so Spider-Man, Deadpool, I think people know, but you're going to have to help the audience with Speedball. Because when you say Speedball, I'm thinking about something that I keep telling my drug dealer I don't want to buy.
Speedball is a character from the New Warriors in Marvel that his powers are kinetic energy based. As he bounces around, he builds up kinetic energy that he can then release.
Okay, so you're young, you're quippy,
yep.
you bounce around building kinetic energy. Okay.
That is exactly the character I built. His day job is a stand-up comedian that he's really bad at.
Of course, yeah.
And he has a stage name for that. And then he goes out and does a superhero thing. At this point, I'd been gaming for a little bit, and I realize I'm the kind of gamer that I like to have drawbacks and things. So I build in that he has side effects. He got his powers from drug trials, and he has side effects. Things like one day he may not be able to feel his right arm. Maybe he has horrible flatulence one day, or maybe his strength is stronger on a day. It could be good things, could be bad things, but it's random. Then I also come up with this idea for him that the more he bounces around and builds up kinetic energy, he gets a high on his powers. So if he doesn't use his powers, he can think straight and he can talk normal and he's a normal guy. The more he bounces around, the more he's basically like a drunk jackass. He's not a jerk. I mean, he is definitely like Spider-Man hero embodiment kind of thing. He is the guy that's going to save the day. He is the guy that's going to go out there and fight the bad guys. But he's also going to steal cable, and if somebody offers him something for saving them and they have a bag of groceries, he's like, I'll take that box of rice. And so that's the character. I put a lot of thought into it to the point that this last year I did Nanowrimo for the first time. That's National Novel Writing Month in November.
The challenge is to write an entire novel
in 1 month. I wrote the novel that was Ricochet's origin story. And I plan on...
How many words is that?
Their requirement is 40,000, okay, which is a very small novel.
Sure.
I went to 50,000 for this. When I edit it, I think it'll stretch out more to like 60 or so. Because I plan on, I just haven't, because I'm procrastinating, editing it all and actually releasing it myself as a self-published novel that is the origin of Ricochet.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, just the discipline to do that is amazing to me because I just don't possess it.
It was my fourth attempt and my first success. First time I tried it, I ended up having a data center move, it was a work thing. We were moving a data center. I was working 60 to 70 hour weeks. Oh. I failed miserably.
Yeah, no way.
And it seemed like every time there was something. This time, one of the things that I had was my dad went through some serious health issues. I did a lot of writing in the hospital room. It was a wake-up call for me. I had started doing the Fear the Boot game notes for the Patreon listeners of Fear the Boot and getting something out regularly, and I was feeling really good doing that regularly. And I had my website that I created and put out there. You and I put our websites out right around the same time, and I started doing nothing with mine. You know, I wanted to do a weekly something, and I wasn't. So when I have this huge scare with my dad, is this huge wake-up call. It's like, if I want this, if I really want this, I need to make it happen. I need to start doing something. And so my Fiction Fragment Fridays, some of them in the beginning were things where I had started a story and never finished it. Some of them were actually fragments. Now every time is a flash fiction story. But in the beginning, some of them were fragments, some of them were short stories, some were things I wrote. But I started writing while I sat there in the hospital room waiting for the doctors. I had a notebook with me, and I would just write. And I remember some of it was like I saw a sign. The sign said something about, it was in the emergency room at that point, and it said something about waiting time being up to 3 hours or something. And so that then became a scene that I wrote that I ended up actually putting into the Ricochet origin novel, where a guy is pissed off and screaming, what part of emergency means 3 to 4 hours? I got into the habit of it. And then once I did NaNoWriMo and I realized I could do it. because I was tracking by the day, and I wrote something every day. I never missed a day. Some of those days were 2,000-3,000 words. Some of them were 200 words, were next to nothing. But I always did something, and I pushed myself to always do it because I knew if I got behind and I didn't do something, I would never finish it. I just kept watching that goal rise, and it felt so good to be done with it. And then I had all these plans of I'm going to edit it, I'm going to do this, and I haven't done any of my editing on it. And I'm kicking myself for it. I really kick myself for these creative projects of I want to do more of it. I want to do more on it. And that even includes Skies of Glass. You know, this last year over the pandemic, we could have had so much more of it done, but all three of us ended up at different times getting into points where just creatively or energetically sapped. And we finally started doing regular meetings because we need to hold ourselves accountable to get things done. So we do every other week meetings. They're on Thursdays when we don't do the actual play. We hop on, we have a conversation, we go through the feedback. We've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we go through and we kind of address the feedback and think things through going forward, figure out what we want to work on next for the next release.
Can I ask a difficult question?
Yeah.
How close are you guys to we want to release this to the Fear the Boot fan base for open playtesting?
Well, right now we've released it to the Patreon backers for playtesting.
Right.
And we're getting feedback on that.
So if somebody's listening and they didn't know and they want to be able to get access to the beta playtest, they've got to be a Patreon backer for Fear the Boot. Okay.
And then they can get it either in PDF form or we shared out a Google Doc because that was one of the feedback we got. People wanted a Google Doc so they could give the comment right there and point to the section in the rules.
Very smart.
Once the rules have gone through all of their iterations and we have everything in the book we want, Dan will go out and get it professionally laid out and all of that because none of us are layout people.
And you know people.
Yeah. And we've had layout work done for other things before. Like Johnny G put out the Blood Moon Goblins, and that layout looks really good.
The last thing that I really want to address is you went from mid-20s, not having gaming experience. You get into the hobby, and you're not doing so in a traditional fashion.
Right. Meaning
that you're playing a homebrew game. Then you're running a homebrew game. And then you're on a podcast about gaming advice, not having come from it from a traditional fashion. Was that intimidating?
I didn't realize the scope of the podcast at first. So it wasn't intimidating, but it might have been if I would have realized that. I didn't know how many listeners there were. I remember being shell-shocked when I went to Gen Con and being recognized in the hall. And I was recognized because I had the Fear the Boot lanyards and badges on and things. But then somebody at one of the cons asked for an autograph. In my mind, I'm like, why in the world do you want that?
Was it your fiction anthology?
No, this was way before that.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
this was at Fear the Con 3. Yeah, the fiction anthology, at least I understand those because, you know, you're signing next to your story.
Yeah.
But no, this was just somebody was trying to get the autographs of all of the hosts. And it's like, this is just me and my buddies that game, and we shoot the shit on a mic.
That's fantastic. Then you guys transition from, okay, we're going to put up or shut up. We're actually going to record us playing the game. So not only are you tuning in and listening to us give you advice about gaming, now you're going to get to see how it is that we game. That had to be intimidating.
Yes. So there were a lot of resistance over the years to an actual play on the podcast because the guys just didn't want to have themselves recorded. I had done it with the guys I was gaming with because that was the way I was gaming with the Funny Books guys. And let's face it, that crowd isn't anywhere near the number of listeners that Fear the Boot has. It is a much smaller podcast.
I have no idea what that's like, Wayne.
So I didn't have that same level of all these people are listening. But even then, I had that thought about, well, we're on a podcast. People are listening to us for advice. If I sound stupid in the game, why would they listen to the podcast anymore? It felt like everything you do is suddenly going to be judged. And so when Fear the Boot started doing one, I had that same level of fear of, well, what if I'm not very good in this game? What if I do something stupid? People are going to be second-guessing everything I do. And there really is that level of thought in the back of my head the whole time as we started. Thankfully, it kind of faded away the more we played because we just had the mindset of we're playing the game and enjoying it, and the recording it is an after effect. Unfortunately, the recording it being an after effect means the sound quality on that podcast is horrible.
It's bad. And
especially guys like Chad who like to grab the chip bag and ruffle it in front of the mic just to be a jerk.
Yeah, to cause trouble.
So when I listened to one of those episodes, I cringed.
I don't want to sound like a narc. I don't mind my voice now when I'm doing audio editing for this podcast.
Oh, I still hate mine.
But I can get past it, right? I hate listening to me game. I can't do it. So when I miss an episode and I listen to the AP in preparation, the AP that I missed in preparation for the next episode, dude, I'm cool because I'm not on it.
Yeah, I have such a hard time editing myself. Like, I hate the sound of my voice, but I'm also a perfectionist. Every and ah has to go. Every breath has to go. And I spend so much time editing just let's say an episode is a 10-minute episode of Game Notes. I'm going to spend an hour and a half editing it.
I believe you. I absolutely believe you. For me, I find that just a little bit of that stuff left in is a little more natural. So I don't cut every time I say so, but I say a lot of it. I cut a lot of them. I don't cut every intake of breath, but I cut a lot of them. You know what I mean?
Yep. And I've learned the same thing. I've started doing that now, leaving some of them in. I still cut a lot of them. I leave the best sounding ones in.
Like when somebody's like, "Oh fuck, man, I don't know," you know, when it sounds like when the conversation has natural flow to it, I like to leave those in. But if it's a real heavy pregnant pause, like editing Chad and Dan both absolutely a breeze. But Chad loves a pregnant pause. I'm like, dude, she's overdue. Just get this baby out and start talking.
Oh, I know. When I edit Chad, I cut down like half of what because of the pauses. Dan, on the other hand, Dan is a breeze to edit.
Yeah, no.
His voice doesn't change inflection.
Yeah, no. I find them both very easy to work with because I've done enough of it now that I can literally just gauge the length and be like, that's good enough. I can move on to the next one. You know what I mean? Here's the next intimidating step, though, because you've gone from gamer to advice podcaster to, hey, guys, watch me game. Are you intimidated by putting a game together that's ultimately going to be a consumable product for the market?
Every time we get feedback, I have to step back for a minute because I will look through it, and if there's a spelling error or something grammatically, even in a section I didn't work on, because I put together the final beta document and didn't catch it, I personally blame myself. So every little bit of feedback and criticism, and I want it. We need it. We need the feedback. But every little bit, I personally blame myself for. And I have to read it and then step away and then come back and read it. Because I feel like it has to be the best. In my case, I love the setting. I want this to be a successful setting. I want everyone else to love it as much as I do. And so if it comes out and it fails, that is going to be crushing because I will feel like I have failed the setting, the game.
It's important to you.
It is. Because a big part of it probably is because it was the first game I ever played. But I just latched onto it, and I love the setting so much. I have such passion for it.
I hope and sincerely suspect that passion will be reflected in the final product. I really do. I think that level of love, it's hard not to leave marks on the product.
You can definitely tell where my passion in the setting lies versus where it's not as strong. I'm not a gun guy. So when it comes to writing about, say, the military technology, that's going to be a lot more of Dan. So as I go through writing the pre-war stuff, I have like a little paragraph on this, a little paragraph on something else, and then you get to GCs and I have 6 paragraphs on genetic constructs because I love them.
And these are genetically engineered animals to be brighter, stronger, faster, more helpful, be able to not necessarily communicate with humans, but to be able to understand humans more so.
Yep, and potentially have glands in them that produce chemicals that can be used for medicines. I love that a lot.
Like the goat that I have out back, that not only do we drink its milk and make cheese, but we also harvest its THC glands. Yes.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And when you go back to the novel, the serial fiction, whatever you want to call it, that I wrote for Skies of Glass Metropolis, GC's played a big part in it. There is a lab there that they get up and running, and one of the things they have lions that have been given the personality and traits of guard dogs. So you have all of the trainability, all of the loyalty, all of that from a guard dog in the physical body of a lion.
An actual apex killer.
Yes.
Wow, that's fucking terrifying.
I loved it when I came up with the idea.
That's terrifying.
And so there are 2 of them, and they have names, and they have different personalities.
I do not go to that fucking town. I'm not going to that town. So I don't want to incriminate you, but my understanding is before you became a gamer, you were kind of a tech pirate, and you're now dabbling in some interesting tech stuff.
Yeah, so I got my first computer with money from being in a car wreck. It was I don't even remember what it was at this point.
I thought it was government compensation for being a ginger.
No, I get nothing for that.
Oh wow, that seems wrong.
There's no benefit for that.
No. I am attracted to many types of people, particularly women, but the red-haired woman, that's my jam.
Same here. So anyway, I got my first computer when I was a teenager. I did BBSs, which we talked about earlier. Yep. You know, your computer calls someone else's computer, and I learned basically from my computer being a cheap computer how to start fixing things. And I kind of worked through that all the way up into working at Six Flags. I ended up getting promoted all the way up. I worked for Six Flags from the time I was 17 to my 21, 22. And then I went to school for computer things. For a while there, I actually worked 2 jobs and went to college at the same time. But I was self-taught up to that point. And I found I really liked computers and technology. And I've always had a bit of a voyeur nature. I like watching people, learning about them, wondering what are those people that are walking down the street? What is their life like? And so...
Yeah, you want to crawl into their head and just, I get it.
So eventually, as I start doing this, I learn more about computers. I can build them. I have all of these gadgets and things. So I'm in an apartment complex. And the first time, I just see this computer sitting out right next to the dumpster. It's like, I build computers. I build them from scratch. I do parts. So I take it in. I take it apart. I have a USB cable, basically, that lets me plug in a hard drive to it. So I don't need to even load up the computer. I don't need to let anything run on it in case there's viruses or anything. Mm-hmm. I plug it into my spare computer that's not online in any way, and I just start going through the hard drive. It reminds me of something that I had done a little while before, which was I was driving down the highway, well, not a highway, more like a street, and I saw one of those storage units was having a sale. And one of the things I found in there was something called a Mac Classic. It was a little Macintosh that the entire thing is all in one box that you can carry around, monitor everything. It's heavy. So I buy it for $5. And I'm already working in IT at this point. I bring it home. I load it up. It doesn't work. I do some research. I find out there's a key combination you can hit, and it'll reload the operating system off of a chip on the motherboard. That was something unique to that one. So I do that, and suddenly I'm in. And I see these letters a person's writing to grandma, and all of this person's life is there. And I start looking through it because it's fascinating to me. And so I remember that when I'm looking at this hard drive and trying to see what the size is and all that. So I just start going through it. And that begins this hobby that I have for a little while I'm living in apartment complexes I just start dumpster diving and I find laptops, computers. One of them, the laptop, the screen didn't work. Didn't matter. I pulled the hard drive out. I loaded the hard drive up separately. I don't need the computer to work to get the data. And I am shocked by the things I find. This is part of where my interest in information security started. There was only one machine I didn't find Social Security numbers on. There were tax papers on almost all of them.
Oh, sure. Guilty as charged.
People don't know how to destroy their hard drives when they throw these things out.
Guilty as charged.
So there's all of this data on it. And the one that strikes me the most, this is one of the last ones I did. I get this laptop. I pull it out. I start pulling the data off it. I realize this used to be her company laptop. She worked in the HR department. There's an export from ADP, which is the payroll company database. Here are 2,000 Social Security numbers, payroll, street addresses. These people have done nothing wrong. If the wrong person had found this hard drive, they could have stolen the identities of all of these people. And those people did nothing wrong. It wasn't them that,
Right. I didn't throw that computer away.
Exactly. That was the first time I reached out to the company. I created an anonymous account. I reached out to the company. I told them, hey, you need to start encrypting your drives. It took me 3 minutes to get a database that has 3,000, I think it was 2,000 Social Security numbers in it. I have destroyed this data, but if someone else had found this, your employees would have been in danger without them ever having done anything wrong. And that was the first time I had actually reached out to a company and said, hey, you need to do better. And that's where my interest in security had started. Fast forward, I'm in IT for a while. I don't get into security actually until recently. I follow what everyone thinks you're supposed to do, what I thought you were supposed to do. I worked my way up through management. I hated it. I didn't want to admit it for a long time. I thought I liked management, but I really hated it. And I've realized that the most fun I was having was when I was getting my hands on the keyboard again.
Being good at something doesn't mean you enjoy it.
Exactly. So finally, at my current company, I had that opportunity. A security role opened up, and this is a company that is very open to switching jobs, moving careers around, and I had the opportunity to move over into security. And I started studying again and learning and taking cert tests, and so I've been doing that now for coming up on 2 years. As I started doing this, I started getting into capture the flag exercises. Basically, capture the flag exercise, someone will set up an environment. They will have text strings in files throughout the environment. Your job is to hack that environment and get those strings.
Yeah, so basically, somewhere in the garbage dump, I've tied 3 pink flags onto refuse. Go find them.
Exactly. Only digitally. The idea behind these is you want the people that are defending, data out there working in security, you want them to know how the enemy thinks, how we call it the adversary. You want to know how the adversary thinks, how they do what they do. You can defend something better if you know how to break it. So these are big competitions. I've done probably about 10 or 12 of them in the last couple of years. Really enjoy them. I have another one coming up where it's going to be my first team one where I'm not doing it by myself. So I really start enjoying these. I start getting into more of that, finding out what's out there, finding out what is open and out there that people don't realize. So just recently, I ran across a Reddit, subreddit that is called Open Directories, where people are going out there and reporting, hey, I found this folder on a web server that you can just get to and see all the files. And
it's just out there.
Yeah. Usually it'll be because somebody doesn't have their permissions right. WordPress is horrible about it.
So it would be like if I just took my family photo album and I left it on my porch and anybody can just walk up and thumb through it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's things like that where people just had their personal things that they threw out there on their web server or they were transferring things. Sometimes it'll be a website like WordPress had a huge bug that was very easy. If you go through a certain path, you can get to everything someone's uploaded, whether they've shared it out or not. Your website is not vulnerable to it. I have tested.
Oh, thanks.
I've tested yours, mine, Fear the Boot. We're not vulnerable to this.
Oh, you're amazing. Thank you. Look at that. I'm getting free security.
But things like that are out there as well. Google Docs, where people have accidentally shared folders in their Google Drives that are out there. People find these, they find out how to get them, and they'll throw it. So I started getting into that, seeing what some of those are that are out there, and then getting into, well, how do you discover them? You know, I've got some resources. I have some things that scan the internet looking for open drives and things that are commercial things that I just have accounts with. One of the big ones, Shodan. If the website has been scanned, it will tell you all the open ports. I look for port 445, which is typically a file share. And so I've started going through these and seeing some of just what's out there.
That's amazing to me that it's just that everybody's ass is just in the wind.
Yeah. Well, and I did this once back when I was an intern. I found out what the management pages looked like for Lexmark printers. And so I did a search for the path share. And I found about 15 printers on the internet that were just open for anyone to get to and get to the web interface and had default logins. And so I made up a Word document that said, hey, just wanted you to know your printer is open to the internet and anyone can get into it, see what's been printed, and here's the link to how you fix it. And I printed that doc to all of those printers.
That's amazing.
So it's the same kind of thing. So
you're like a proper white hat.
Yeah, if I find something like that now as I've started doing this, I'm going to reach out to the people and say, hey, you have a tax paper out there. I actually found one this morning that I reached out to the person saying, hey, just want you to know you have out there publicly available.
But you could be a monster.
Yeah, but I'm not, because that's not what I'm interested in.
No,
although I will admit, I'm looking to see if there's any porn out there.
On that note, Wayne Cole, so I know your website is Wayne Cole, spelled just like it sounds, .net.
Yep, because I couldn't get .com.
You can be found at Fear the Boot and a broad catalog of Fear the Boot free episodes. On Patreon at Fear the Boot, you provide something that you do exclusively or not exclusively, but mostly called, it's your show, it's your brainchild, called Game Notes, that is only to people who are supporting on Patreon.
Yep.
You've been in a couple flash fiction anthologies, and you're doing your own fiction on WayneCole.net. And you're one of 3 driving forces behind getting Skies of Glass to market, so chuds like me can buy a copy and meet you at a convention and ask you to sign it.
Like I said, in the last year or so, it's kind of in the wake-up call of I want to start getting things out there. What is keeping me from being a writer? It was me not writing. So I started writing.
Well, Jesus Christ, that's fucking heavy. It is sheer elegance in its simplicity. It's succinct, it's impactful, it's true, and it makes me hate myself. Wayne, thank you so much for being on the show today. Hopefully sometime soon when Fear the Boot is ready for some beta testing or getting out there to the general public, maybe I have you and VC and Dan on in person and we talk about all things Skies of Glass.
I'd like that. Hard to get VC to agree to be on. He's kind of humble, but I think he can do it.
I think that if the 3 of us were in the same physical space as him, I can make it happen.
Yeah.
You put me in the same room with somebody, I think I can make it happen. All right. Well, Wayne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why We Game is a production of the Influence Foundation. All rights reserved. Audio editing by Brodor. Music by Owen Godwin.